So as we think about cultivating flourishing, about participating actively and intentionally in both our own spiritual growth and the growth of those around us, what should healthy growth in community look like? And do you have some examples of when you might have seen this?
I was thinking about a plant when I was thinking about this question. I'm terrible with plants. I'm a plant killer. I'm not a plant grower. And so I have really good understanding of what unhealthy growth looks like. It's when there's only one green leaf and the rest of it is brown. When the soil is dry, when there's no flowers happening. And a healthy plant to me is when you can see that same green everywhere on the plant, not just on one or two leaves. And I feel like that is kind of what it looks like in community. Like if it's healthy growth, then it should be spread across the community, not only in this little spot or that little spot or this age group or that age group. It should be like across the board.
I thought about it in terms of like if we're seeing our church as like almost like a family unit, like when you see like a healthy family that's operating well, I think the ideal is that your home sort of serves as a safe space for the kids and for the parents, a place where they can be recouped, where they can relax, where they can, have a lot of their growth happen. But ultimately that growth is to be outside the house, right? And so I think sometimes for us as a healthy community, I think we're gonna look healthiest when being here means we're better out there, right? And so I think that as a church community, I think we could really aim to sort of feel like the more we're with each other, the more that when we're outside, when we're with our community, when we're trying to spread God's word, that's really effective when we're not between these four walls. And I think that would be one thing that it could really look like if we did it right.
I'm trying to think of how to say this, and I love the example of the plant, and just in terms of health and how we envision health. Both in terms of our bodies and other things around us. And one of the ideas I'm trying to tease out is there's an element of consistency. Because oftentimes, we don't all maybe grow at the same pace, or we're not at the same level all the time. But we need a very kind of a solid base, a consistent base that we can either fall back on or that can help us to get to where we need to go. Right, and so I think the idea of a healthy relationship, a healthy church, is that foundational element that allows us to make mistakes, to ask questions, to be forgiven, to be welcomed, to be restored, and for that cycle to start all over again, and as well as the faith to know that if you are consistent with your love and with your forgiveness and with your welcome and with your encouragement and with everything else, God will add the increase to it. And if I get a chance, I'll tell you this great story we have about a plant. But I think for me, an element of health is that kind of subtle undercurrent that is stable and steady and always there, that allows us to expand our horizons, almost like a safety net. In a sense.
Kind of running off of what you're saying and what you said, what everyone said is if we take the concept of a healthy church and community and compare it to that of a plant or ecosystem and that kind of thing, I guess church is the soil. That's right. It's the thing that lays the groundwork and that kind of thing. So every person is a plant and they root themselves in the church, but they also are able to grow outside of the church, right? But the soil too needs to be cared for. It needs to be watered. My parents would be so much better at this than me because I'm not a gardener, but it needs like mulch. Yeah. I guess that's the thing. Fertilizer. So yeah, but the soil itself needs care, which means that the church in terms of a community needs care as that holistic viewpoint as well, if we are to ultimately end up caring for the individual, which is the plant. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So we had this plant, I think it's an African violet at home. It was the tiniest little thing. And for the longest while, that's what it was. Just this tiniest little thing. And my wife she always saw value in it. She always thought it was going to be great. And so would always repot it. And it has like this choice spot where it's just sunlight, but not too much sunlight, and nothing happens. It just sits there year after month after month, maybe year after year. It seemed like a very, very long time. Until one day we looked at it, and the thing was in full bloom, like 3 different colors. You know, the petals were different colors, and I'm like, what just happened? And I think I love the idea of a healthy church being that place where you can nurture this, where the soil is rich, but we're allowed to be. You know, you're allowed to discover your calling. You're allowed to make mistake, be corrected, be welcomed, be nurtured. You know, be restored, but also too that you're seen as one of God's children. Ultimately, whether you're blooming or not blooming, and we put you in the sun. We allow you to be whatever God is calling you to be, and one day, based on His sunlight, you will become what you need to be. And I think for me that is healthy. You know, it might not be what other people consider to be healthy in terms of vibrancy and all that stuff, but for me, just the idea that you can languish in a sense, or seemingly languish, and then burst into bloom, I think is an awesome thing. I think we could all use some of that. And I think a church could use that, our communities could use that as well. And that will be healthy for all of us.
I sort of wondered, like, when Jim first came to me with this idea for Flourish, and this idea, like, there's another edge of this sword that's scary and something I don't think we should pursue, right? There's this idea that we should all be looking like we're flourishing, right? And so I think that's a trap that there's a potential we get into, where we're all trying to present this image. I'm working on me, you're working on you, we're all doing the thing. And I sometimes do wonder, and I wonder if you guys have any thoughts on this, like, if someone's going through a really tough personal time, they're struggling with family issues, they're struggling with employment issues, they have some significant health issues, how can they still be flourishing here? How can they flourish in that season? What does that look like, right? So I do wonder if there's a potential that focusing so much on flourishing means that we're not thinking about someone's life circumstance. And I think you made a great point about sort of saying this place should be a steady state for people, where they can feel like when they come here, they're at home, they're coming here for some respite when times are tough. But I do wonder, how can someone who's going through a really hard time also be flourishing? What does that look like practically? I just wondered if you guys had any sort of thoughts on that, whether you thought that through.
I, first of all, just really love that you're even bringing that up, because that's just a fact of life, that it's going to be impossible for us to be in a community and not have people who are struggling with something at some point or another. And I'm going to speak personally for me, that I think it's easy to live in our world where we define flourishing by output, and that Jesus's definition of what it means to flourish is actually nothing to do with outcomes and everything to do with connection to Him. So that, in fact, whether or not you're struggling with unemployment or anxiety or a death in the family or an illness or whatever is actually not an indicator of whether or not you're flourishing, that in fact it's truly just about connection to Him. That's the life source, right? So that's where we're saying that optimum place for growth comes from, at the end of the day, it's that connection directly to Him. You use the language rooted down, or maybe you use the language rooted down, I can't remember, but yeah, I feel like we have to stop defining flourishing, or whatever word you want to use, by worldly terms, and start defining them the way Jesus defines them. You use this all the time, it's an upside down gospel, right?
Yeah, for sure. And then I think of the community piece of that. So when somebody is in a time like that, that's where that safety and that the grace and the other parts of the community of that soil comes in to hold them, right?
Yeah.
To hold space for that.
Yeah, the soil sometimes is what holds stuff together, isn't it?
Yeah.
Understanding the source. I think Elizabeth just really hit the nail on the head, that it's really the connection you have to God, to the person of Jesus, that makes all the difference. And so it doesn't have to look like everything else on the outside. You can still be going through illness and have a really hard time, but you have a faith that God is going to bring you through. And that in your own small way is your own element of flourishing. The fact that you can get up every single day and have this faith that God is going to bring you through. And, I was at a memorial service a couple weeks, a week or two ago, and for a gentleman who he had been ill for a while and really had a tough go of it. And one of the persons who got up to speak was telling us about how he would call him to say, "Hey, how are you doing?" and to encourage him. And then he was like, he turned around and he was encouraging me. He's like, "Wait a minute, I am calling to encourage you. What are you doing?" But in his own small way, even though he was bedridden, even though he couldn't get up and go around, he was immobile. He was flourishing because he was connected to the source, right? And I think if we can stay connected to that source, we can flourish no matter what state we're in.
So, so I think that we can acknowledge that this type of cultivating growth in community, in a healthy community, is a way that we are actually following Jesus' example. So when we consider our current climate, the world we actually live in, the church we actually go to, the types of lives we actually have, how do you think we're doing in this respect?
I would say that we are a fragile ecosystem in which everything is kind of just so, and any opportunity to necessarily move forward or that kind of thing is deterred for various reasons, right? This can be people just simply can't coexist, differing values, different beliefs, different perspectives, that kind of thing that prevents movement forward, whatever that may look like. And I think that is partially due to the world that we live in, where consumerism and individualism are at the forefront of our existence, and they are pillars in our own lives, right? And we bring that into the church, and we bring that into the ecosystem, which is why it's so fragile, because any one thing said or done, and it shatters. Right? And then this community that's supposed to exist is actually not a community, it's cliques. It's tiny little groups of people who have formed their bubbles and refuse to engage with anyone else or let anyone else in. And that's not a church. And I think, to some respects, Forestbrook is like that.
Yeah, I was sort of thinking a similar thing about sort of like whether we need each other. And do we act like we need each other? And I think so often we all of us would probably contend, no, we do need each other. But do we act as if that's really true? And I even think about Jesus, right? Like the guy comes, he's the Son of God. He could do just about whatever he wanted. And he decided, I'm going to round up these 12 dudes and they're going to help me out, right? And so like he did not need them. He did not need them to do what he needed to do, but he said, I want a team. Like, I want someone to help me. I want to do this together. And so I think as a church, sometimes we could look around and say, like, how could I need the person next to me more, right? Like, how could they help me? How could I help them? I think that would be like a really awesome way that we could all flourish together, because what we can do by ourselves is really pales in comparison to what we can do if we all sort of lean on each other a bit more.
True. It ties into what you were saying a couple of minutes ago around, like, what if it doesn't look a certain way? Does that mean someone's not flourishing? And I feel like there's this danger of buying into the belief that because I don't look a certain way, because I don't make a certain amount of money, because I didn't do this schooling, or because I don't have this kind of job, or I live in this kind of place, that therefore I kind of am disqualified, or I'm less than in some way. And so then we don't act in a transparent and an authentic way, because we're afraid if we admit I'm struggling with this, we might be looked down upon, or if we admit that we don't think the same way as you do, that somehow it might create some sort of, like, I don't know, problem within our community. So there's this, like, I think, danger of coming to church with our church faces on and how are you? Good, thanks. How are you? Great. How was your week? Awesome. Meanwhile, they just got fired, or they just got a diagnosis, or they've been struggling for 4 years with something, and nobody knows because there's not that willingness to enter in. And I'm not saying this from a posture of doing it all perfectly. I think I'm as guilty of that as anybody else is. So yeah, do we need each other? Do we act like we need each other? And you're right, Jesus modeled that this is meant to be done together. He modeled it for us.
Just to pick up on what Chelsea just said about the tension of the church and how exactly are we doing. And for some, for some of us, the church kind of deeply represented a coming together, a place of safety. People have shared beliefs in a world that is eager to prosecute beliefs that were outside of the norm or didn't represent the norm. But in that safety that we found with each other, we forgot, or sometimes we do forget, that the gospel is meant to be outside. And Jesus demonstrated that time and time again, that he was going in all these places, reaching out. And you just talked about the example of Jesus trying to get out. He didn't need them, but he still went and called disciples, right? And I think as a church, as much as we feel whole, as much as we feel comforted being in each other's company, being able to gather together, the message of the gospel is out there. It's for outsiders. It's to be in the field, in our communities. It should be far afield. And so, sometimes it's hard because the organization of church sometimes vacuums up all the resources, and we forget that church is really outside. Church is where people are. Church is meeting people where they're at, where their needs are, being able to help, being able to encourage, being able to give them security and provide them with shelter and a place of refuge as well. And that is, we are the church writ large when we do that and outside the building. And so how are we doing? Depends on the day. It depends on how much we remember what God has really called us to. Like, he looked down on this world and he wants to save every single person. And so we who have been saved, we need to have that same impetus as well. We want to run out, rush in, and be and demonstrate. Not demonstrate. It could sound very performative, but to be in all the places he wants to call us to. Right. And so we struggle. That's how we're doing. We struggle with it. But we, to the extent that we can remember what it's all about, and to the extent that we can trust him in terms of stepping out in faith, knowing that he will furnish us with what we need, I think whenever that happens, on the days that happen, we have really good days.
And Chelsea, I really liked your point about, how do we operate as a church? And the one thing I was thinking about a lot is like this, this idea of, do we notice those who are struggling? Do we know who's going through something? Is the conversation as simple as just, hey, how are you? Hey, how are you? See you later. I'm going to the Swiss Chalet and I'll see you later. And it's sort of transactional. Yeah. And I think you're right. Like, sometimes I sit in church and I look over and I see someone and I think, I've seen that person however many times. Do I know their name? Do I know where they live? Do they have a spouse? Do they have kids? Do I know? And I think we could do better at sort of flexing our muscles. And the one encouragement I would have that I've found being here the last couple of years is, like, if I go to something that's maybe a bit out of the ordinary for me. I attended Alpha this year with a friend, and I'd never done Alpha before. And I showed up and I met Gene Burns. Now, I didn't really know Gene Burns, and I would never have known Gene Burns. Me and Gene Burns wouldn't go we wouldn't hang out in the same circles or whatever. And now I love Gene Burns. I have to go say hi. I have to go say hi. I can't not, right? And so I think the one encouragement I could say is like, when we decide to show up in places, we decide to go where it's not comfortable, you'll be surprised who you meet. And I think the same thing about our youth. Like, I do the youth small groups, and I used to see these kids walking around and be like, these kids are such a nuisance. Like, they're doing this, they're doing that. They seem really annoying. And now, like, I'm their youth leader, and I love those kids. I love every single one of those kids. And so I think the more that we try to know each other, and everything about what's hard, everything about what hurts, everywhere someone needs a little bit of help to flourish, sometimes people need, some encouragement. When you know them, that's going to be so much easier, right? And so I think part of it is not a program where we're going to match people up, but go to places, shake someone's hand, say hi, share a joke, and you'll learn to sort of, I've found I'm learning to meet people and know them. And then when something is amiss, I notice. I can say, oh, something's not right, And so I think that's the one thing that I've sort of learned is like, can I put myself in a place where I normally don't belong here, right? And so I think that is a challenge for all of us because we all have our chair and we all sit in our chair and we all shake and look at the same people, and like maybe sometimes it takes a bit to just sort of use that muscle to say, do I know the people that I'm at church with and do I need them, right? And so I think that's something we can all definitely work on as a church because Jesus certainly knows all of us and took the time when he was on earth to get to know people, right?
This is how we start the videos.
Oh, we start videos.
Yeah.
That's what we do.
So what are we doing here again?
So we are making space. We're making space to
More space.
Even more, always more. No, we're intentionally taking a little bit of focus from that conversation to digest, to reflect, to process what we've heard, and to talk about how that's affected us and what's really jumped out at us. And maybe we should also say here, I mean, when we filmed these conversations, we knew we had some really strong, amazing contributors with important voices. But we wanted to release them and be as free as possible to let that conversation go how it went, for God to sort of do the weaving of all the things. And so we gave not a ton of context or prep or direction, just open-ended big questions. And it is incredible, has been incredible to see how, just connected and intertwined each of their sort of perspectives were, and how just wise and I've just really loved to see that just unfold on its own. Like none of this has been scripted or
not
laid.
scripted like this. It's not. We're just.
Well, that's
wrestling.
obvious.
We're kind of wrestling. We're kind of wrestling with this. So I didn't mean to cut you off, but one of the things I want to say that you just prompted. I actually feel that this is one of the ways God speaks to the church.
Yes.
Right. It's people who have wrestled through the nuances, but the specifics, the history, the experience of church to just be like, here's what I feel and think.
Yeah.
And here's how it's rooted in theology, if you want to call it, because if you study Christian history, this is what the church has done. Churches have come out through conversation, through movements. And I just thought that the way you articulated that right now was like, it was really good. It was good stuff. Yeah.
So, what did you think?
There's, again, like I think there was a lot. And I think that's the point. It's not meant to be like, okay, what's this one and done? Like I've thought about even the prior conversation even more after that and how it builds into this. And I think I may have remarked in the last conversation where filming this, I was like, yes, in the background. But the two things that kind of stood out to me was one where Previn said, it requires consistency of a home base to be this place. And I know that we've been wrestling with this idea of like, is church something I go to? Like, what does my church stand for? And I think maybe in one of the ways of thinking, it's like church is my Sunday activity and I have to be consistent in that. And that's fine. But I think we're trying to like make space, if you will, for more of that, where church means a little bit more. There's more to that. And that requires consistency. And I think that's what I heard. And that gave me some pause. To think about like what other habits do I need to be consistent in order for me to be the church more than just coming to church.
Sure.
And not that there's guilt if you don't come to church. I don't want people to hear that. Like we're saying, be consistent and come every Sunday. That's not what I'm saying.
No.
But the other piece that really stuck out to me was when Andrew mentioned the fact that let's be cautious here. That flourishing doesn't mean that everybody looks the same and going to be this the same. It's like, I'd hate for everybody to think that you have to act a certain way, be a certain way, and whatever. And especially if those values are more like mankind's or humanity's structure, as opposed to here's actually how God is inviting you to flourish this way.
Right.
So you might be going through a life difficult moment or difficulty in your life, but you could still be flourishing. You could be, X, Y, or Z. And so to me, it just draws this really great picture of how God is gathering people around this group of people, or creating his church, if you will. So I really love that. I'm still parking on both of those to see what that means.
Yeah, me too. And that piece then, I think it was Elizabeth who said, what if the way we define flourishing is about being connected to the source? It's not just a big green leafy blooming thing, right? It's actually defined by not what it might look like, but what's happening there, the connection to the source. And
productivity is not the
that's
thing,
right. So, okay. I don't know if you've taken a drive lately, just a little bit north. You have to go a little bit. It's just starting here. The fall colors are just starting to creep in where we are. But if you go just a little bit further north, they're really starting to pop. And of course, like the yellows and golds and reds and oranges and still greens woven in, and it's just like the most magnificent, wonderful thing about living in this area of the world, and certainly one of my like all-time favorites in terms of seasonal things and things that I love. And no one would deny that those trees are flourishing, that this is a beautiful display of what those trees are supposed to be doing. But the thing is, those leaves are dying, if not dead, and about to fall down to the ground. And then the branches will lay bare for the winter, right? So it just hit me this week as I was pondering what I'd heard and thinking through Andrew's points and each one of them, to say, we can't miss that there is beauty and flourishing even, as, not maybe as the world defines it, but in those seasons of shedding leaves and in loss and in death and in those hard things, right? And that it's really about being connected to the life source. That's the thing. That's how we should define flourishing. That's how we flourish. And so, I loved that reminder to us that we need a wide enough definition, right? When we say we believe God's heart is flourishing for his people in every season, like what does that look like in the fall? What does that look like in the winter? And are we holding a wide enough definition of flourishing to include what we really think, his heart is for his people? Just as you said that, I want to add this, because just as you said that, this is dawning on me, and I think you're saying, I believe you're saying this, and just this is me working it out. It's almost like the fall leaves are, if we're to think about making space, that flourishing does require of some letting go in order to continue to whatever flourishing looks like in that, but there's still beauty in that letting go, and what does that look like for that? That's good.
Anyways,
you just took it one step further.
I didn't. I knew. I was just. Yeah.
It's good.
It's good.
Yeah.
It just hit me.
It's great. Okay. Whew. Okay, so we want to leave you with some questions as we look at the fall leaves, as we sort of digest this conversation. We really hope that it is spurring many more conversations in homes and families and friend groups and whatever within our spiritual family. We want to leave you with this question: how do you stay connected or reconnect to the source, to Jesus? And then also, as a next part, how does the quality of that connection affect your connections with those around you?
More to come.